Faith is obviously an emotional state. It is putting what you wish was true ahead of what is demonstrably true, and that's what makes the religious such laughable jokes. However, some of them get really upset at that and try to set the record straight in some pretty massive air quotes. So let's take a look at one of those today, shall we? Here comes an Andy Bannister video without Andy Bannister. It seems like he's not really doing a lot of his own work anymore, doesn't it? This time we get Steve Osmond, who wants to ask if faith is just an emotion. Yeah, largely that's all it is. It certainly isn't a rational state of being where you intelligently assess the data, examine the evidence, and come to an intellectual conclusion. It's not where you care at all about the actual truth, because truth doesn't matter one bit to the religious. But I guess it's time to go and see what Steve has to say. Won't that be fun?
Isn't having faith just an emotion?
Yes, I already answered that. But completely seriously, that's really all it is, right? It's all about fifis, not demonstrable facts. The religious don't care if it's actually true, although they would certainly disagree. But if you have a conversation with them about it, it becomes clear very quickly that they don't give a damn, period. That's kind of a problem, wouldn't you say? That's why I have always recommended asking a lot of "how do you know that?" questions, and they will never have an answer. Faith is not a demonstrable way of knowing anything. It's an excuse provided when you've got no good reason to believe what you do. I have a feeling that Steve is going to rationalize his way around it, but hey, what do I know, right? Let's go see.
Well, this is a really good question, and the short answer is no. It's so much more than that.
Not demonstrably. So here he goes into the bald rationalizations, I'm sure, although I'll let him get to that on his own. The problem is, faith only serves the emotional side of the believer. It isn't like the religious are running experiments or taking verifiable observations about the things that they believe. They're not. They can't, because the things they believe are not demonstrable. If you have demonstrable evidence, then you don't need faith. Faith is completely useless. If you have any actual data, you present the data. You don't have to say you have faith. I have faith in nothing because I care about the evidence and the state of demonstrable reality, and I don't care how I feel. The religious, not so much. I don't think this is going to turn out that well for Steve, but let's wait until he hangs himself, because the religious always do.
But I think the question is birthed out of this idea that some people have faith and some people don't.
Which is true. Of course, it depends on how you're going to define faith, and the religious love to jump through hoops trying to rope everybody else into their style of faith. And that's why I use their silly book against them. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." It's what they hope for. It's the things they cannot see. That's not evidence, and it certainly isn't anything that they can independently verify, whereas I, pretty much without exception, go with what I can see and what I can verify. I go with what I can put to the test. That's why I don't have any faith, and they unfortunately do. Faith is not a virtue. Quite the opposite, in fact. Faith is nothing that you should ever be proud of. You should be ashamed that you have to lower yourself to faith. Granted, Steve won't go for that. None of them ever will. So let's see how he rationalizes his way around it. And it won't be pretty, I'm sure.
Just like some people like vanilla ice cream, and some people like strawberry ice cream. It's really very subjective, and each person likes or doesn't like it, just as some people have faith or don't.
I don't think that's how that works. Faith isn't a preference, it's a fundamental part of your outlook on the world. I don't have faith because I see no value in it. I care only about the real world, the things that we can examine and study out there in actual reality. And that's not necessarily easy all the time, but at least if you care enough to try, you'll be a more rational, intellectual person than somebody like Steve is, at least when it comes to his religion. Sadly, people can compartmentalize, which is what we typically see. They can be perfectly rational in their day-to-day lives, right up until they reach their religion. Then all of their critical thinking and rationality, that goes into one room, and they pull out the irrationally wishful thinking nonsense of religion, which is in another. Never do the two sides meet. I can't get the religious to agree to that, at least most of the time, although there certainly have been a few exceptions. The ones that freely admit that their religious beliefs are just made up bullshit that they believe because it makes them happy. There's something seriously wrong with those people, of course, but I do get a few who are going to admit that. And that is all very sad.
But I think that's a bit of a short-sighted view of faith, because it really is so much more than that. When I think of my Christian faith, that is my Christian belief, it is actually grounded in evidence.
Bet it's not, because you will get people who make this claim, but the second that you try to nail their feet to the floor to get them to actually produce the supposed evidence that they claim they have, they can never do it, right? Evidence, by its very nature, is demonstrable. You can show it to other people and verify that it's true. And that is not the kind of evidence that the religious ever have. They just have wishes and dreams and stories that they've heard from the pulpit, and none of that is actual evidence. That's wishful thinking. That's delusion. That's just really wanting it to be true. That is not anything that anyone should be proud of. That is the hallmark of an idiot, and the religious side is full of idiots, right? They just really like the idea. But liking the idea, that isn't evidence. Evidence, as I've defined it to many theists, is that which can be shown to actually exist and support this conclusion to anyone without having to believe in any conclusions about it first. That is not what the religious have, and the second that I ask for that kind of evidence, they either whine, which a lot of them will do, or they run. They can never trot that kind of thing out for all the world to see, and that's what they need to do.
You see, there was this man, Jesus Christ, who lived around about 2,000 years ago.
But you have no evidence for that. You have stories in a book of mythology that claim that happened, but you can't independently back any of that up. That's the problem. These stories mean nothing without some way to corroborate the stories, and you can't do that at all. You have to be able to back it up without relying on faith and beliefs and wishes and dreams and all of that shit. It doesn't matter if you really like the idea. I don't have that kind of emotional attachment. You've got to show me that it actually happened in some objective way without appealing to your beliefs. If you can't do that, then you don't have evidence. You only have faith. The evidence is what's important, and if you have sufficient evidence, then the faith is completely irrelevant. That's why the religious just tell themselves these comforting stories, because that's all they've got. The fact that you and I can poke a million holes in their assertions proves just how weak their positions actually are. Nobody ought to believe it, at least nobody with a brain. And that says a lot of negative things about them, doesn't it?
In and around Jerusalem, and we have documents in the Bible that tell us about his life.
Except you don't. The Gospels were written anonymously by non-eyewitnesses who copied off each other more than anyone ought to accept. Actual eyewitnesses don't need to crib off of other people. They just tell their own stories, and that is not what happened in the Bible. My book says a thing is not impressive, not in any field. If you go and read a science book and the book says a thing, that doesn't make that thing true. You can and should go back and ask for the corroboratory evidence that supports the conclusions in the book. In fact, do that with the religious. It's funny to watch them squirm because they don't have anything that corroborates their stupid stories. They have nothing but the stories and their own wishes and dreams and blind faith. Hell, ask them how many women were at the tomb after Jesus supposedly died. All of the Gospels have different numbers. Watch the bald rationalizing begin, because they can't present a unified narrative that adds nothing and takes nothing away. Why? Because it's all nonsense. Not like they care. They just really want to believe.
They tell us about his life, they tell us about his death, and they tell us about his resurrection.
They tell stories that you cannot back up in any objective way whatsoever. Outside of the Bible and people who believe the Bible, you have zero demonstrable contemporary eyewitness accounts for anything. You just have stories in a book of mythology that you happen to like, and that is not going to impress anyone with a brain. We need more, and they have no more. That's why they have to fall back on faith. Faith is not now, and it will never be enough. That's why they have to keep trying to redefine their terms. Sorry, your book already did that. It is the only place in the Bible where faith is directly defined at all. Are you telling me that you disagree with your book? Well, of course you do, because there's a lot of really heinous shit in that book, and you don't want to talk about that stuff, do you? That's why you're being a hypocrite, and that's not exactly a surprise.
And I think when you add up all the evidence, when you look at the case for the reliability of these things, I think there is a really strong case to be made. There are also really good arguments for the existence of God.
We'll cover those two independently. First, you have no evidence. I have defied any theist to present actual, demonstrable, verifiable evidence for any of the supernatural elements in the Bible, and they can't. They just can't. Go ahead and pick your favorite and show me how you know, not believe, not have faith, how you know that it's true, how you can prove that it's true, how you can provide actual, demonstrable, verifiable evidence that it's true. And I'm predicting crickets, because we already have a rational definition for evidence, and they simply can't meet it. So that's one down. Any theist who wants to provide that kind of evidence, the kind that I've already detailed down in the comments, please do. You'll be the first one in history who ever has. Secondly, though, your stupid arguments mean nothing. Philosophy is not the proper tool for establishing anything that objectively exists in the real world. Every single religious philosophical argument, it's just a logical fallacy waiting to happen. I don't get it, therefore God. That's an argument from ignorance. I don't like it, therefore God. That's just an argument from personal incredulity. Neither of them are at all impressive. You don't get to just redefine your imaginary friend into existence. That's not how this works. If you want to show that your God is real, you have to provide objective, verifiable evidence that your God is actually there, and you don't have that. So no, Steve, you've got nothing. I don't care if you're convinced that you do, that you really like the idea that you do. That just makes you an idiot. Put up, provide your evidence, prove that you have the slightest fucking clue what you're talking about, or shut the hell up. But you'll do neither, because you're just a fool.
And so on one side, faith has a very rational side to it. There's the evidence side.
No, that's the dishonesty side. You have no evidence, not one bit. You just really like to think that you do, but you don't, and you know it. At least you ought to know it, but most of these people are deluded out of their gourds, and that's another problem entirely, isn't it? These people have massive problems with intelligence, facts, maturity, you name it. They are, by and large, just immature children who are terrified to grow up and live in the real world where they don't have a magical father figure in the sky to watch over them. Because that is not real. At least we have no evidence that it is. So you don't have anything rational, you just won't accept it. You're just playing make-believe. This is like a child arguing for the existence of Santa Claus because they've got presents under the tree. But that doesn't mean Santa done it. Stop being a moron, Steve. It's not a good look.
But again, that's not where it ends. There is the emotional side to it. When I think of a human relationship, one of marriage, often it'll come with feelings of love and excitement and joy and elation. Sometimes some other feelings will come along with it as well.
But those relationships, those are demonstrably real. Unless you've got a hot girlfriend from Canada, people can actually see your significant other. That's the important bit. Other people can verify that your claims are actually true. Now try that with God. You can't because there is no evidence for your God. If there was, then you could show other people your God, even if those other people were not predisposed to believe it. That's why you have no evidence and your protestations to the contrary don't matter, because if you can't put up, and we all know that you can't, then you really need to shut up. Sadly, the religious seem incapable. They are desperate for that emotional validation of their unjustifiable beliefs, and pointing out just how empty it all is, and it is empty, that doesn't mean a thing to them because they were never really after reality in the first place. Pretend I'm from Missouri. Show me. And if you can't, then I'm not going to believe you. It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what you have faith in. It doesn't matter what you want to be true. It matters what you can prove to other people. You need to be able to prove it to me if you want me to believe it. Give it a shot. Stop making a fool of yourself.
But those feelings do not determine whether the relationship is real. Those feelings don't determine whether the other person actually exists or not.
Exactly. That's why you need external, independent, verifiable evidence. And as we've already established, you don't have any. It's kind of hard to hear him admit that his fifis mean nothing, but I'm sure he'll realize the error of his ways and try to fix that momentarily. Your feelings mean nothing. And without the evidence, the independent, verifiable evidence that you don't have, your claims don't mean anything either. I was waiting for you to present the actual evidence that you claim you have, and you can't do that. You need to. When do you think you're going to get to that? Never, perhaps? I mean, that's pretty typical. So let's get back to where he was talking about his feelings and not proving his claims were actually real. Because I agree, you can't do that and your feelings don't matter. That's your cue to actually do something of some kind of substance. And anybody think he's going to? Yeah, I don't either.
You see, that person is there and the relationship exists whether or not I feel a certain way or whether or not I feel any way about it at all.
Or the person isn't there and the relationship doesn't exist because a relationship, a real relationship, requires two existing parties. Again, that's your cue to back up your bullshit, and we all know that you can't. That's why I use the hot Canadian girlfriend so much, because that's exactly what he's doing here. It's what they're all doing. He desperately wants a God to exist. He doesn't want to be alone, and he doesn't want other people to look at him funny. So he claims that his hot Canadian God goes to another school in another state or another country or whatever, and that's why nobody ever gets to meet her. Pictures? Never. Certainly not with the two of you together, unless you've got some mad Photoshop skills. It's just something that you found online anyhow. Call her up on the phone? Well, she's always busy, conveniently. Or maybe you talked your sister into faking a call. Hell, maybe you did it with your mother, you never know. And that's kind of weird if you think about it, right? But there is no verifiable demonstration that this girlfriend or this God actually exists beyond your say-so, and that is not impressive. We don't care what you claim. We care what you can prove. And sadly, you're not very good at proving anything, are you?
I think about C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia Chronicles, if you're familiar with those.
I am, and they kind of suck. Yeah, I know some people like them, but even when I was a Christian, they kind of struck me as a cheap knockoff of Lord of the Rings, which is really kind of what they were. I mean, Lewis was friends with Tolkien and kept encouraging him to keep at it, but I suspect that Lewis wanted Tolkien's work to be a little bit more Christian. I mean, Tolkien had been working on Middle-earth for decades, even if Lewis beat him to publication by a couple of years, but he certainly knew what was in the works, and that's all it takes to be jealous. Granted, I don't think we can ever know since both men are dead, but I was never that impressed with the Narnia stuff. I mean, Tolkien was far better. But anyway, he was going to go into something that Lewis said, I guess. I don't really care, but please feel free so that we can all laugh at it, because Lewis was a complete idiot too.
He started off as an atheist, but when he looked at all the evidence for the existence of God, all the evidence for the reliability of the Bible, and the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, he saw these things, and the overwhelming evidence led him to believe that actually this is true.
Yeah, I don't buy it. Oh, sure, that was his story once he started making money off of it, but he could never present any evidence either, and that's kind of the point. That's why people like J. Warner Wallace and Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel and, hell, Ravi Zacharias, if you want to throw him in there, they don't impress anyone either, do they? Mostly because these stories don't stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny. People like Strobel almost certainly lie about their former beliefs because the timelines they claim, they just don't match up. Their behavior doesn't mark them as rational skeptics, which, granted, they didn't exactly claim to be, because I don't think they know what any of those words mean. Believe it or not, you can be an atheist and an idiot at the same time. There are plenty of those out there, but that doesn't really mean anything. Come back when you can show that you were an active skeptic who cared about the actual evidence and the real world, and we might take you a bit more seriously. And I'm pretty sure that none of them can do it, so let's just move on, because this is getting him nowhere.
But that's not where he stayed. He moved on to have a deeper faith and trust in Jesus, and that relationship grew. And if you read his writings, you will see deep and complex and beautiful imagery and emotion that his faith had.
Yeah, because he was an idiot. We've talked about Lewis in the past, and he was aiming at the lowest of the low, the least impressive conceivable tier of religious wishful thinkers. He had nothing intelligent to say. He just said it in very small words, intended for complete idiots, so that he'd make a buck, but he wasn't very good at it. I mean, that's not to say that theists are only in it for the money, because there are some, a small number I think, who really do believe but aren't really trying to get rich. And I think Lewis was one of those. However, not being a scam artist like most modern apologists doesn't mean that what you believe is true is actually true, any more than the Buddhist priests who set themselves on fire, that means that Buddhism is true. This is why we have to put their claims to the test, and none of it, not Lewis, not Turek, not Craig, not any other apologist from any other religion, none of their claims ever stand up to rational evaluation. I wonder why.
And when I consider my Christian faith, which I believe is based on evidence, it doesn't end there.
But you still have no evidence. And I talk to people who say, I have evidence. And then when I ask them to present it, all they can do is make excuses for why they can't present their evidence. Because they have no evidence. They don't even understand what evidence is. I believe it really, really, really strongly, so it just has to be true. Somebody told me that we have evidence, so I accepted that uncritically. But that doesn't mean that you have evidence. Evidence is what you can produce, not what you can claim, and the religious can't produce anything of substance at all, can they? That's what makes it all such a colossal waste of time. Put up or shut up already. But he can't do either one, right?
But it gives me a greater map of the world. It helps me locate myself within it and see that there is meaning, that I have value, that I have purpose, that humanity is special and loved by God, and that this is true.
All of that is just a claim. You can't prove that any of that is true. And it's the proof that you need to have, not just the assertions that make you guys have a warm fuzzy inside. That's the thing, though. They have no actual evidence, no defensible evidence, no verifiable evidence, nothing that they can present to others independently. They just believe that they have evidence. They have faith that they have evidence. But that doesn't mean that they have evidence. It just means that they're clueless and delusional, and I'm sorry, but if that's the best you can do, and it is, then you are an idiot. The evidence has to stand up to the critical evaluation of others who don't share your blind faith. Let us know when you come up with some of that, because until then, we're just going to laugh at you, and we should.
And so there's the emotional side, there's the rational side, and faith by no means is just an emotion.
Everything that you said just proves that to be wrong, though. This entire screed has been emotional and nothing else. It's been the stuff you really want to be true, and it never strays into, here's how I know it. And it certainly never strays into, here's how I can prove it to others. Because you don't actually care if it's true. You just really like the idea. I care if the things in my head are true, and I have demonstrable evidence that I can present to anyone else that shows that it is, at least to the best of my current ability to evaluate it. You've got nothing. You are a laughable joke, which I suppose isn't surprising given that you're on Andy Bannister's channel, and Andy's kind of a pathetic wanker. Andy doesn't have anything either. You all just wish that you did, and that is simply not enough. Never has been, and never will be. Come back when you have something of substance to present. And I guess that means we'll never see you again, which isn't exactly a bad thing either, is it?
But it is also very emotional. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't looked at it before, look at the claims of Jesus Christ, read the Bible for yourself, and see that, in fact, there is a God out there, that he does love you and know you and is reaching out to you. And I would really encourage you, take a step of faith, try and speak to him, try and pray to him, and see what happens.
Been there, done that, it failed miserably. Granted, people like Steve and Andy, they don't care. They're making money off of views and donations because, well, that's really what they're in this for, right? Earlier, he said something about having a personal preference for a specific flavor of ice cream, but reality isn't a preference. Whatever you claim either exists or it doesn't, and it does so entirely beyond your preferences. It doesn't matter how much you really wish Jesus was real. Jesus either was or wasn't, and you don't matter in that equation at all. That's why I keep saying that you need to take yourself out of it entirely and just go with the demonstrable facts. And the religious, they can't do that because without them, without their wishes and their dreams and their faith, nothing that they believe is demonstrably true at all. And it's the demonstration that matters, not the empty claims. And they've got nothing but empty claims, right? If they had anything substantive, they would just present that to everybody else, and everybody else would see that it's actually true. But they can't because they've got nothing. Whoever manages to prove God rationally is going to have a Nobel Prize in whatever science happens to prove the claim. The fact that they don't have any proves just how empty their claims actually are. And Steve is no different. He just really wants it to be true. But wanting a thing doesn't prove that thing is real. And that's why, once again, we're just going to have to laugh at his stupidity. Are we ever going to find an apologist, a theist, anyone who can actually back this stuff up? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because I really don't think so. How about you?